Thank you everyone for coming. We appreciate your efforts in helping patients with mental health illnesses. I know a lot of them look to you as a source of relief and hope, and we're very grateful that you're here today taking your time out of your busy schedules. We have an introductory webinar for implementing qEEG into your practice to improve clinical TMS outcomes. And before I introduce our guest speaker, Shari Johansson, I would like to say a little bit about who iMedisync is, as we're sponsoring the webinar, Unlocking the Potential of TMS with EEG-Guided Precision. So first off, we have our founder, Dr. Kong. Dr. Kong started at Seoul National University College of Medicine as a family physician and pain specialist. And he realized that he wanted more of an objective measurement for neurological diseases. And as a result, iMedisync was born. They started off as a software company and later advanced to creating the hardware so they could continue their research. They're very involved with doing research studies on Alzheimer's, on traumatic brain injury, and they continue to just research and see the best way to help our clients. We have Dr. Kim of our research and development. We also have Dave Burkus, who is on this call today. Shout out to Dave. He is our CFO. I have the privilege of meeting with him weekly and hearing all of his wonderful stories and career paths and things he has learned. And then we have a amount of advisors who we seek counsel from to make sure we're doing things right, that we're giving a reliable service and product, and that it meets the needs of what the experts would like to see. And Jay Junkelman, I'll just give him a little shout out. Shari and I actually had the privilege of attending his Sassoon Summit conference this last October. So it was fun to be there. Martijn Arns, who's also a famous researcher for TMS, was presenting at that conference. So it was fun to see him. So iMedisync was established, and then they created the device iSync Wave. iSync Wave is a wireless dry EEG measurement where we can collect our EEG scans or our brain scans. Inside, it also does heart rate variability monitoring and photobiomodulation or near-infrared light therapy. So our device is what we use to quickly collect a scan, which can take less than 10 minutes from putting the helmet on, gathering the data, and then we upload it to a cloud to get our results back immediately. The iSync Brain features includes an age and sex match database. This is where a brain scan is compared against a normative population to see if there's any dysregularities of hyperactivity or underactivity. We also offer an AI denoising to eliminate things like eye blinks or muscle tension, things that aren't brainwaves, so we have a clean data to look at. And then these comprehensive reports are generated. And these reports is what gives us an idea on helping us design a TMS protocol. And to the right of the screen, I just want to mention that we are a super friendly bunch. We love to get to know people individually on a one-to-one basis. So if you have the time, please schedule a demo. We would love to show you from start to finish how quick and easy it is to get an EEG scan. We're also on LinkedIn, and I will put my contact information in the comments in a little bit in case you have any further needs for questions for us to answer or telling us a little bit more about yourself. All right, and that leads us to our team. Of course, we have Dave Burkus as our CEO. And as you can see in the picture here, one of the prerequisites for being on our team is you have to have amazing hair. We have Cody Newman, our technical engineer in Denver, Colorado. He's right here. If he's on the screen, you can give us a wave. Then we also have Chris Che, who is our sales and marketing and general manager. We always love to come to him for advice and counsel. Carlos is a part of our business development for Latin America and Europe. And then, of course, myself, marketing and sales specialist in none other than Las Vegas. So with that said, I would like to give an introduction to Shari Johansson. I've known Shari for about 2 years as we've attended multiple neuroscience conferences together. I've had the pleasure of hearing her teach and speak. She has been a trauma therapist for 30 years and eventually implemented EEG and qEEG in her practice, as well as neurofeedback. And she did this after amazing results were seen in her own children. I love her personal story and testimony to the use of EEG implication. She is now a clinical director of Gray Matters Neurofeedback and Counseling in Denver, Colorado. She is also the director of Synergistic Solutions Education Services. This is where she teaches and supervises in counselor education, EEG neurofeedback, and qEEG interpretation. She is also a mentor to many TMS psychiatrists and helps them deal on a case-to-case basis with their clients. She is a board certified mentor for the International qEEG Certification Board. And the qEEG Certification Board is kind of the standard in the EEG field of what you want to look for in a mentor. And so without further ado, I'd like to turn the screen over to Shari so she can present to us today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. So today I want to introduce you to the iMedisync system and show you how and why it will be beneficial for you to make EEG and qEEG part of your standard intake evaluation. I will introduce you to the stratified care model. We will briefly talk about EEG and the quantitative analysis process. But the heart of this talk is to demonstrate that the EEG and qEEG are of tremendous value to your psychiatric practice. Learning to interpret qEEG is beneficial in a number of ways. First, it will aid you in confirming diagnosis, way better than the DSM, whatever level we're on now. It's a good prognostic device, and it will help you evaluate the effectiveness of your interventions. But the supreme reason to learn to identify biomarkers from the Q is that it will direct you to the appropriate treatment for your patients and thereby shorten the time to get your patients to a positive treatment response. So, introducing the concept of the stratified care model. This research is hot off the press. Dr. Martijn Arns presented this at an International Neuroscience Summit that I sponsored in California last month. This research was just published in Nature Neuroscience under the title Biomarker-Driven Stratified Psychiatry, from Step Care to Match Care in Mental Health. Look it up. It's a great article. Okay, so this is from his research. The top of the slide is our current model. The stratified model at the bottom is when we are going to look at the biomarkers first to choose even our first line treatments, but then also our protocols for TMS. Now, what this does is, you can see on top the traditional model, it's trial and error, and it can take months to get somebody to the right medication, much less if they're going to fail medication onto TMS or ketamine or ECT. Psychiatry and TMS is not a one-size-fits-all, and we've learned that through years of the traditional TMS, but an N of 1 is not practical or researchable or reimbursable. So to improve outcomes and reduce the number of trials to get to response, we want to be able to predict the treatment that will work before prescribing it. So using EEG biomarkers to stratify patients into groups is a much more practical approach for medication and TMS protocol decisions. Using these biomarkers, we can get to the most efficacious treatment faster. So we suggest you look under the hood at EEG to do matched care. And so this is just depicting, how we group people based on those biomarkers. Quantitative electroencephalography is a tool that measures electrical activity in the form of brainwave patterns. Brainwaves are rhythmic electrical impulses generated when millions of neurons communicate. We see these patterns in the EEG and use quantitative analysis to put the information into FFT graphs, which are fast Fourier transform signal processing, and head maps of power, location, and connectivity to be able to more easily view the brain's behavior. The history of EEG dates back to 1924 with Hans Berger. He was a German psychiatrist who invented the electroencephalogram in order to view and study activity of the human brain. This was way before MRIs, CT scans, or SPECT. The transitional to digital EEG came about in the 1960s and was popularized by UCLA's Brain Research Institute. They were the first ones to introduce quantitative analysis of the EEG. Now EEG is more accessible than ever thanks to advances in AI technology of systems such as the iMedisync. It is now affordable and accessible in private practice. I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain waves, the different characteristics. It's a brief introduction and it's not precise, but it'll give you a good idea of what I want to talk about when we're referring to brain waves. So in this graph, you can see the delta, theta, alpha, beta, beta 2, high beta listed with their frequencies and their general characteristics. But I like to explain it on a graph. So I'm going to see if I can use my pen. That is not a straight line, but you get the idea. The y-axis is going to measure microvolts, or how high a pool of neurons is firing, how much power it's using. The x-axis, the horizontal axis, is the speed of the wave, and we name waves by their speed, and our time frame is going to be 1 second. So we're going to start off with the delta. The delta may not even finish. It's a big slow wave. I'm going to mostly stay above, but know that a cycle goes above and below the line. So a delta is a 0 to 4 hertz. Think of infants. Infants' brain frequency is in a delta, and they sleep all day. Now, by the time a child is 4, they should be in a theta frequency, 4 to 8 cycles approximately. We'll see if I can get in 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. So a theta frequency is a suggestible state. Think about your 4-year-olds. I mean, they can, play with Thomas the train for hours because of their imagination. They're also suggestible. If you tell a 4-year-old that Santa's going to come down the chimney and put stuff in their stockings, they believe you if you're a trusted adult because they're in a suggestible state. If you go to a hypnotist, they're going to try to get you into this state. In fact, when we're trying to access trauma, some of our psychedelics are trying to get us into this state as well, because our deep beliefs are formed in this frequency and stored in this frequency, and this is where we can access them for change. So that's theta. I also nickname it the ADHD frequency because traditionally, if you had theta in the executive center, that was what we would call attention deficit disorder. Now we know that ADHD can appear in different frequencies, but this was the traditional view. By the time you're 10 years old, you should be in an alpha frequency. 8 to 12 cycles per second is alpha. We're going to talk a lot about alpha. Alpha is basically the shutter speed of the brain. It's how many packets of information do you pick up in this 1 second interval. I would say that all of these are kind of sleep or subconscious. We are conscious in alpha, but I think of them as slower waves that should stay in the back of the head. And I think of our thinking waves starting with betas. So right now, all of you should be in what's called beta 1, a 12 to 15 cycles a second. I'm going to use the Greek beta there. This is also called SMR, but beta 1 is 12 to 15 hertz. If it's across the sensory motor strip, it's called SMR. This is our open focus learning, so relaxed learning frequency. If I had you guys hooked up to an EEG and I told you there was going to be a test, and that if you passed that test, you were going to get a big prize, like maybe an iSync helmet, you would pay closer attention and your brain waves would literally speed up into beta 2. And this is a fast, and the faster they are, the smaller they are. I am not going to get even 15 in, but you get the idea. So this is what we would call cognitive processing. These are our thinking waves. We should see a lot of these in our executive center when we're looking at an EEG. Now, if we go faster than this, up into the 22 to 35, this is going to look pretty anxious. Let's see if I can get that in there. I'm not even counting, but you get the idea. If I see this in a resting state EEG in my office, I know that this person's going to have an anxiety disorder, because when you kick up into 22 to 35 cycles, it is actually too fast for cognitive processing. Our frontal lobes actually go offline. I think it was Siegel that talked about the hand model of the brain, and we flip our lid here. This produces cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, and puts us into fight, flight, or freeze. If you are in the woods and chased by a bear, you're not going to slow down your brain waves and pull out a map to figure out how to get out. You're instinctively going to choose fight, flight, freeze, and all of your energy is going to go into your extremities and out of your brain. So this is high beta. And then we also have the gammas after that are even faster. And these are, what we know about gamma so far is that it's a binding rhythm for memory, processing, mental sharpness, organization, etc. And they're very fast frequencies. So this is just an introduction to the brain waves. But the other thing that I want to show you, if I can erase this messy graph here, and I'm going to draw Charlie Brown heads, which are our topo maps that we get when we do a quantitative analysis. So nobody has a head this round. That's why I call them Charlie Brown heads. But when you're looking at the topo maps, you're going to see where the nose and the ears are. We would like to keep our delta, theta, and alpha all in the parietal and occipital part of the brain. And these should be big here, double when our eyes close, and get much smaller as we move to the executive center. Our betas should be noticeable here and almost disappear towards the back. So that gradient is important to know when you're looking at a normative database or a healthy brain. So we're going to talk a lot about biomarkers, which come out of research from phenotypes. And you can see that this is referring to Johnstone's paper in 2005. So when you're looking at EEG, you need to read these papers from Johnstone, Gunkelman, and Arns on phenotypes, which are now often called biomarkers. So the ones that are highlighted in blue here are the ones we're going to focus on today. But just know that there are lots of biomarkers used for determining medication and TMS protocols. As you guys know, TMS is used to modulate the activity of specific brain networks, which are sets of interconnected brain regions that work together to perform various cognitive and motor and sensory functions. TMS can activate neurons and cause them to fire. It can also inhibit neurons from firing or suppress activity. TMS is also useful to couple or decouple networks. So learning the brain biomarkers will aid you in deciding on protocols for each of the stratified groups. Now, from my understanding, TMS is targeting the gray matter stimulation. As I've mentioned, we're going to concentrate on finding the connection highway from the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex to the subgenual ACC for major depressive disorder and OCD. From my understanding, most of you are going to find the spot, which is in TMS, looking for the location where you stimulate the brain and get the thumb movement, the trigger for the motor threshold. From here, you're going to move approximately 5.5 centimeters forward, depending on size of the head, to land you at what in EEG land we call F3 on the 1020 system. Now, I've heard from Martijn Arns that use of the neuronavigator places the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex just slightly anterior and lateral of this F3 location. But interestingly enough, the research shows that there was really no difference in patient outcomes. So I think we're safe at either spot here. And he also noted that typically the frontal lobe needs less power than what is used to elicit the motor movement. Okay, when using quantified analysis, we're going to compare the patient's EEG to a normative database. Since we're looking at biologic markers, it is necessary to use a database that separates males and females since we are biologically different. The iMedisync was the very first to note the importance of this and put forth the money and effort to build a gender-specific database of well-vetted healthy norms. Patients can be grouped according to biomarkers revealed in the EEG. This step in your evaluation will be synergistic with your testing and clinical interview to give you a more specific picture of what your patient needs. Once you experience qEEG's value, you will want this information on all of your patients because it can be used for diagnosis confirmation, biomarkers to use with ketamine and medication selection, but also our FDA cleared TMS protocols. All right, there are different types of machines I'm aware of with different capabilities. What we have here is deep TMS shown on top, and then the traditional 8 coil here on the bottom. But in the next few slides, I'm going to show you examples of how qEEG reveals the 4 biomarkers we're going to talk about and will guide your TMS protocol selection. And the biomarkers we're going to focus on are for major depressive disorder. This is not an exhaustive list, and research is ongoing. So the first one we're going to talk about is an individual's alpha peak frequency. Then we're going to talk about frontal asymmetry. This one's most helpful in females, but I've used it both with males and females. Beta spindles would be our third, and then frontal midline theta we will look at, especially in regard to OCD. What I love about the iSync system is that it will give you this in this graph for your client's individual alpha peak frequency. It will tell you the power. So again, this is the y-axis, this is the x-axis, and you can see that this person has a very fast alpha peak frequency, and that's that shutter speed. So at 10 hertz, you're picking up plenty of good information. Think of it like a shutter speed. If y'all remember cameras when we had cameras and shutter speeds, the faster the shutter speed, the more detail you pick up in a short amount of time. The slower shutter speed would have a blurrier effect, not get as much information. I think of it that way. So if you have an 11.8, you've got a very fast shutter speed, you're going to pick up a lot of information. So this biomarker is featured in Arn's latest research, that individual alpha peak frequency, and I'm going to explain his graph next. So this is what he studied in treatment-resistant depression. So at the top, he's using the predictive value of the biomarker. So in this data set, they were testing 18 and 20 hertz. And so if you had a low alpha peak frequency in green, you responded very well to 18 to 20 hertz. If you had high decile scores, you did respond, but not as much. And if you had an average 10 hertz, not so much. Now, on the bottom half of this slide is what's called a decile score or decile ranking. And what they have done is arrange the data in order from lowest to highest on a scale of 1 to 10, where each successive number represents 10%. So the norm would be hovering around 10 hertz. So if you're in this orange area, then research shows that a 10 hertz TMS frequency should be effective. But the further you are off from the norm, you need to find a different type of protocol. So grouping people by this individual alpha peak frequency, if you fall into a low decile score, your alpha peak frequency is less than 9, you're going to do better with an 18 to 20 hertz TMS stimulation. However, if you are like the client that I just showed you and had an 11.8, you're going to be up in this purple region as a fast alpha peak frequency, and you're going to do better with 1 hertz TMS. And this has replicated studies. So this is a very important one, and it's simple, and I hope it will help you tremendously. Now we're going to move on to the second biomarker, which is frontal asymmetry. This one is most helpful in females, but I've also used it with men and had good success. So think about, this is from a quantitative analysis, and think about that Charlie Brown head again. So I'm going to orient you to this graph. These are the fast Fourier transforms on all 19 channels that we have on the head. So we expect our delta, theta, I probably should put my laser pointer back on here. Delta is brown, theta is red, alpha is yellow. The green are good betas, and the blue are into high betas. So we expect those slow waves, the delta, theta, and alpha, to stay in the back of the head, parietal and occipital. In this case, there's alpha everywhere. And we're looking at frontal alpha with major depressive disorder when we're looking at the asymmetry, and this is a left-sided dominance of alpha. So this client was successful with the left 10 hertz TMS. This person may also respond well to an SSRI or a SNRI. Okay, our next biomarker is beta spindles, and here we're looking at the raw EEG. This is beta activity with a spindling morphology. Now you will see this on your FFT transforms as blue humps, but this is best seen in the raw. It has a sinusoidal morphology, and to meet criteria, it should be 20 microvolts or better. It's also often observed after benzodiazepine use, which we often prescribe for people with anxiety. Benzos have a sedative effect on the front side, but the day after, they're going to produce some beta spindles, which could make the anxiety more intense. The fun thing about learning to read raw EEG and the Q is I can look at these beta spindles and hone in on the fact that, I can see it here at FP2, FZ, F4 is the largest, FC4 is also large. And by knowing Brodmann areas, I can say, oh, beta spindles at F4 I can predict that my client's going to have impulse control problems, agitated depression, poor emotional gating. These are your people who will have anger outbursts because this is an overactive frontal beta network. Now, when beta spindles are seen at the central midline here at CZ, I can predict insomnia, particularly waking often or very light sleep. Now, this biomarker is going to respond best to right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex 1 hertz TMS that will deactivate and calm that frontal beta network. They're also good candidates for neurofeedback, and they would do well on a trial of medication that stabilizes the EEG. So of the SSRIs, sertraline is the best at that, or maybe a GABAergic medication. Frontal midline theta is another biomarker. It's also a phenotype called hypoprofusion, meaning they don't have enough blood flow to the front of their brain. So this case could be ADHD or OCD if we're just looking here. But the presenting problem with this patient was OCD and depression. So in this case, the patient's going to respond best to right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex 1 hertz to desynchronize the theta and beta. You can see that they're, they've got a slow theta peak here, but also lots of beta. So this gets a little bit trickier, and the case presentation we're going to do is even trickier. But in this case, desynchronizing the theta from the beta was successful. Okay, other biomarkers, paroxysmal activity and epileptiform content. This client, when you see this in the raw EEG, again, it may or may not add up in the transforms and the head maps, but if you see this in the raw EEG, this person's going to do well with a stabilizing agent, like a lamictal. They will also respond to neurofeedback. Traditionally, we would not take a seizure client or paroxysmal for TMS, but that's the old wisdom. New research suggests that compared to SSRIs, TMS actually has less chance of lowering the seizure threshold. So perhaps we're going to proceed with caution. I don't have TMS protocols for IEDs for this reason. This research is new, but I would say stay tuned. This is a full-on seizure client. All right, and we still use these biomarkers, but like I said, a year ago I would have said this is a contraindication. Now I would say, well, let's see what the research is going to show us. Now we're going to talk about a treatment-resistant major depressive disorder case study. Background on this client, she's a 54-year-old female, long history of depression all the way back to adolescence. She failed multiple psychotherapies, years, multiple medication trials. She already had traditional TMS and electroconvulsant therapy. I want to note that her alpha peak frequency sits at 11.5. That's important. We also see in the topo maps excess slow wave, especially in the theta band. She also has a slight alpha asymmetry and excess beta and gamma. Now, even from this, I can tell you why she was a non-medication responder. She's got a theta dominance and a beta dominance. And I think of the brain as this 3 pounds of electrical chemical jello. You can't just flavor one part of the jello. If you put a chemical in, it's going to affect the entire brain. And so if you were to give her an SSRI or a stimulant to help with this slow wave, it would have a negative effect by inadvertently speeding up the EEG and making the beta issues worse. But a GABAergic or downer medication would make the slow waves worse. So she's a classic medication failure patient. This is a tricky case. Even recognizing several biomarkers, clinical experience is going to be useful here. She was previously treated with the 10 Hertz F3 TMS without any positive response. Her alpha peak frequency is 11.5. This puts her in the biomarker of high desol score. She has excess beta with spindles. This presented as an agitated depressant, and the beta spindle marker is also a biomarker and very important. She does have some alpha asymmetry as a biomarker. However, we note that she was treated previously with left 10 Hertz TMS and was not successful. So using the biomarkers for the stratified model, what TMS protocol would research suggest we use? So since I know her history and she had failed the left F3 10 hertz, I eliminated that option. And both the high decile score and beta spindles would put her in the stratified group where she would be treated with 1 hertz right TMS. And that's what she received, and it was tremendously successful. You can see in the raw EEG, less beta spindles, less frontal slow waves. And I love looking at the raw. You need to make sure that what you think you see in the topo maps, you absolutely see in the raw EEG. But a picture is worth 1,000 words. And when you can compare pre-treatment, post-treatment, clients love to see this. It is clear to everyone the tremendous changes made by her 35 sessions of TMS. And she felt great. So I have demonstrated the evidence and clinical utility of using the qEEG for clinical psychiatric practice. Now we want to discuss the ease of implementation using the iSync Wave helmet and the iMedisync AI cloud-based quantitative tool. So learning to artifact and analyze normally takes hundreds, if not thousands, of EEGs, depending on how well you see patterns. And the iSync Wave can make this easier. It is a dry sensor helmet that positions the electrodes correctly at the 1020 site before you have to learn this, which can take weeks. The AI analysis platform does require that you vet the EEG of artifacts, which I can teach you in a few mentoring sessions. And the AI will help you with some of that as well. This enables you to quickly begin and learn to identify the biomarkers that we have reviewed today. Doing the analysis manually can take a couple of hours. However, iSync cloud-based software will deliver results within 10 to 15 minutes that you can share with your clients immediately. You can learn to interpret the advanced analysis with time. And the iSync Wave also has built-in PBM. Photobiomodulation is transcranial red light therapy. It's easy to implement and increases mitochondrial activity in the brain. I have found, and a growing body of literature suggests, that PBM improves outcomes of many types of neuromodulation interventions, including TMS. Okay, now I'm going to test your attentional abilities by playing a little bit of a video that just shows you how quick and easy this system is. Now, iSync Wave and iSync Brain can confirm diagnosis, predict prognosis, determine your treatment interventions, find biomarkers, and get your client to the correct stratified group, thereby getting them to a treatment response quicker. And PBM adds more energy to the patient's brain, increasing neuroplasticity and decreasing recidivism rates. What she's doing right here is just prepping the skin with what's called new prep. You can also use alcohol to remove oils. We just want the dry sensors to have great skin contact. And you want to make sure that you place the helmet correctly. You don't want it lopsided from side to side or too far over the eyes or too far back on the head. You also want to make sure that the logo is on the front. We will not have accurate information if you place the helmet on backwards. It would be a back-asswards brain. And now she is putting on the ear reference clips, right and left. And always make sure that you use the strap, especially on young kids, but anybody can have a coughing fit or sneeze, and you don't want this helmet to end up on the ground. Okay, now she's just turning it on and going to Bluetooth it to her tablet, making sure it's connected. Your instructions will come up in whatever language. They don't have to be in Korean. All right, and now we're looking at impedance, or basically, did the sensors connect with the scalp, with the skin? We would like to have all green. There's also a vibration mode that can wiggle those sensors down to the scalp. If not, you can move each of them as she is manually. You can also use a plastic tool to part the hair and make sure that the sensor is touching the scalp. I've had to do this one time on a client that was in an orphanage and had a very flat parietal. I had to extend these sensors at O1 and O2 in order to get good contact. And here we're back to all green, and now we're ready for the signal test. And that's looking like beautiful EEG. The iSync wave also does heart rate variability. So now we're getting our PPG signal. And then back to EEG, and we're ready to record. Okay, so how to implement this in your practice? Well, you're going to conduct the EEG assessment with the iSync wave, and then learn to understand the underlying brainwave patterns that relate to the biomarkers that we've talked about. It is good to collaborate with the EEG mentor to interpret these and design those effective treatments or TMS protocols based on the biomarkers. You're going to administer your TMS based on the stratified model. And then what's great about the ease of this is every 10 sessions, I would conduct another EEG and just make sure you're getting the changes that you expect in your client. If you're not, you can use that information to adjust TMS protocols to maximize the patient's likelihood of success. And then what I love most is doing a before and after, as we saw in those topo maps. Your clients love to see real data of their changes. So conclude your TMS with a post-treatment and showcase the improvements in your client's brain. This iSync AI analysis is the best automated quantitative analysis system on the market. Together with the helmet, this is the most expedient way to learn the power of qEEG and add it to your practice. I've been teaching and training professionals for many years, and I must say that the iSync system is the easiest way to obtain an adult EEG. The iSync analysis tool enables you to quickly identify those biomarkers and start using them. Adding qEEG to identify the biomarkers and stratify patients accordingly will revolutionize your practice by leading your patients to the most likely treatment to get response remission fastest. If I can assist you in the purchase and implementation of the system or an EEG, qEEG education or certification, please call me or email me.